The silence before judgment. The first mistake the galaxy ever made about humanity was simple. They thought silence meant fear. It wasn't fear. It was restraint. And restraint, in human history, was never permanent. The Karathi Dominion arrived without warning, no parley, no broadcast, no diplomatic beacon. Just a distortion in space above Jupiter's moon Europa, like reality itself had blinked and regretted it. Then the ships came through. 12 of them at first. Massive, angular things that didn't reflect sunlight so much as refuse it. They hung in orbit like executioners waiting for paperwork to finish. On Earth, the United Nations Space Defense Network picked them up instantly. Within seconds, every military channel lit up. Within minutes, every civilian network followed. And within an hour, the world went quiet. Not because nothing was happening. Because everyone was listening. The first transmission came in flawless human English. No translation lag. No distortion. Just certainty. You were observed. You were measured. You were judged. A pause followed, calculated, surgical. You are insufficient. Then came the second mistake. Earth tried to respond. The UNS Resolute, humanity's most advanced interplanetary warship, fired first. A full salvo, kinetic rail lances, plasma torpedoes, electromagnetic disruption bursts, layered defensive warheads. A display of everything humanity had built in centuries of paranoia. The alien ship didn't dodge. It didn't counterattack. It simply acknowledged the strike. And erased it. Every projectile vanished mid-flight, not exploding, not deflecting, just ceasing to be part of the universe. As if the concept of weapon had been administratively revoked. A second later, the Resolute followed. No explosion. No debris field. Just disassembly at a level so absolute that even atoms forgot they had ever been arranged into a ship. On Earth, someone whispered, "That wasn't combat." General Marcus Hale stood in the Pentagon Deep Command Chamber, face lit by the blue-white glow of collapsing tactical maps. "No," he said quietly. "That was a demonstration." Above Europa, the alien voice returned. "Your expansion beyond your origin world is classified as uncontrolled contamination." Another pause. "Containment will begin." Then the feed cut. Just like that. War declared. No negotiation. No escalation ladder. No political theater. Just judgment delivered like a sentence already decided. And humanity, united for the first time in decades, did what it always did when someone tried to dictate its ending. It said nothing. For 48 hours, Earth did not respond. No broadcasts. No military signals. No diplomatic channels. Even panic seemed to have been classified and temporarily suspended. The silence confused the invaders more than the resistance had. On the Karathi flagship, High Executive Threx studied the data streams with increasing irritation. "The species has ceased communication entirely," the intelligence beneath it reported. "Collapse?" Threx asked. "Unlikely. No systemic failure detected." "Then surrender." A pause. "No surrender signal transmitted." Threx tilted its form slightly, a gesture of analytical discomfort. "No species expands into interplanetary space without instinct for survival," it said. "This is inconsistent behavior." "Recommendation?" the intelligence asked. "Apply pressure." And so they did. Mars died first. Not dramatically. Not with defiance. Just a single orbital strike that peeled away its thin atmosphere like skin from bone. Entire colonies erased in less than 60 seconds. 12 million dead. Still, Earth said nothing. Dr. Evelyn Voss watched the casualty report scroll across her screen without blinking. 12 million, she said softly. General Hale stood beside her, hands behind his back, like a man waiting for an execution he had already scheduled. "They're testing us," she said. Hale shook his head slightly. "No." "What then?" He looked at the red marker blinking over Mars. "They're learning the wrong lesson." The second strike hit Titan. No warning. No speech this time. Just elimination. Mining colonies, research stations, communication relays, gone in a clean sweep that left the moon intact but lifeless. Still no response from Earth. The Karathi fleet began to reconsider its assumptions. Silence, they decided, was not surrender. It was malfunction. On Earth, silence was something else entirely. It was preparation. Deep beneath multiple classified mountain facilities that officially no longer existed on any military registry, systems began to wake. Not new systems. Old ones? Very old ones? General Hale descended alone into the lower command vault, where the air tasted like dust and forgotten decisions. You activated them, Dr. Voss said behind him. Hale didn't turn. We didn't activate them. A pause. We just stopped preventing them from waking up. On the central display, dormant satellites began re-establishing contact. But they weren't satellites humanity had admitted to building. They were the reason certain wars in the past had ended too quickly, with too little explanation and too many missing records. Voss swallowed. Marcus, if we use those. Hale finally looked at her. If we don't, he said, there won't be anything left to argue about. Above Earth, the Karathi fleet prepared the final containment strike. Efficiency demanded closure. Threx authorized planetary sterilization. Begin. The command never finished. Because every long-dead satellite, every forgotten probe, every classified platform humanity had ever denied existence suddenly lit up at once. Not broadcasting a warning. Not requesting negotiation. Just transmitting a single repeating message across every available frequency in the system. Confirmed hostile intent. On the flagship, alarms, systems the Karathi considered obsolete, began to scream. Threx froze. What is this? It demanded. The intelligence hesitated for the first time in its existence. Multiple origin points detected. Source? A pause. Pre-contact human infrastructure. Threx's form darkened. That is impossible. Another alert spiked across the system. This time, from beyond the fleet. Far beyond. In places they had never mapped. Never considered. Never believed anything could be waiting. General Hale's voice came softly through Earth's last open channel, not broadcast, not public, just threaded directly into the old network like a knife sliding into a locked door. They thought silence meant weakness, he said. A faint exhale followed. It never did. On every screen in the Karathi fleet, ancient human battle arrays began to align for the first time in centuries. And somewhere in the dark between stars, something long buried finally remembered it had been built for war. The things Earth forgot it owned. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't an explosion. It was absence. On the Karathi flagship, 12 orbital strike vectors blinked green. Target Earth. Full sterilization authorization locked. High Executive Threx issued the final command. Commence containment. Nothing happened. Not delay. Not resistance. Just refusal. The fleet's weapons systems responded with a single unified message. Authority override detected. Threx paused. That is not possible, it said. The intelligence beneath it answered too quickly. I am not initiating it. A second later, Europa's orbit lit up with something that had not been there moments before. A human platform. Then another. Then dozens. Old architecture. Forgotten launch signatures. Pre-unification era encryption keys, systems that shouldn't have survived atmospheric re-entry, let alone centuries in cold storage. And yet here they were. Waking up. On Earth, General Marcus Hale watched the same feed with a face that looked like it had long ago accepted consequences. Dr. Evelyn Voss stood beside him, her voice tight. You're telling me those are ours? Hale nodded once. Technically. Technically? He sighed. They were never supposed to be activated again. Why not? Hale didn't answer immediately. That silence said more than words ever could. Then, because the treaties that shut them down weren't written with aliens in mind. Above Jupiter, the Karathi fleet began to reorganize. Threx was no longer curious. It was annoyed. Disable their systems, it ordered. The intelligence responded. We are attempting. Then attempt harder. We are unable. That word, unable, hung in the command deck like a malfunctioning oxygen line. Threx turned toward the tactical display. Hundreds of human signatures were now appearing across the system. Not ships in the traditional sense. More like arguments made physical. Old defense satellites reactivating orbital mass drivers. Cold War era kinetic platforms shifting into alignment. Deep space probes repurposing themselves into signal jammers, relay disruptors, and what looked disturbingly like weapons the Karathi had no classification for. And beneath it all, something worse. Something still waking up. On Earth, the political layer finally cracked. The United Nations Security Council Emergency Chamber was no longer debating. It was reacting. What the hell did we just turn on? Someone shouted. Another voice snapped back. We didn't turn anything on. Those systems were decommissioned. General Hale stepped into the center of the room, and the noise dropped instantly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. They weren't decommissioned, he said. They were denied existence. A nervous silence followed. Dr. Voss spoke quietly. Marcus, what did we just wake up? Hale looked up at the projection of alien fleet movements. Then at the blinking human signatures across the solar system. And finally, at the Earth itself. All the things, he said, we built when we thought the galaxy might not like us very much. The Karathi fleet struck first. A coordinated suppression wave, energy-based, reality-disruptive, designed to erase technological systems at their structural level. It worked beautifully. For approximately 6 seconds. Then it stopped working entirely. On the flagship, alarms cascaded into each other. Human platforms resisting suppression. Impossible energy persistence detected. Structural inversion of containment field. Threx leaned forward. Explain. The intelligence hesitated. Then, we are no longer the dominant system in this engagement. A pause. That status has been transferred. And then humanity did something very, very old. It stopped defending. And started responding. The first counterstrike didn't come from Earth. It came from orbit. A buried kinetic platform above the dark side of the moon rotated for the first time in centuries. No warning. No diplomacy. Just physics. A tungsten rod the size of a subway train was dropped from orbit with enough velocity to turn distance into impact. It didn't explode. It didn't need to. The Karathi escort vessel simply ceased forward existence. Not destroyed. Removed from the equation. On the flagship, Threx finally stopped pretending this was a contained engagement. What are they doing? It demanded. The intelligence responded. Re-engaging dormant planetary defense doctrine. That doctrine is obsolete. A pause. It is not aware of that. Mars responded next. Not the dead colonies. The planet itself. Hidden under its surface, beneath dust, ice, and silence, mass accelerators aligned in ways the Karathi had never detected. The first shot from Mars wasn't aimed at ships. It was aimed at space itself between them. A ripple of kinetic force tore through the void, scattering 3 capital vessels into drifting fragments of misaligned matter. On Earth, Dr. Voss whispered, We built weapons under Mars? Hale corrected her gently. We built insurance. The Karathi fleet began to adapt. But adaptation requires understanding. And they were rapidly discovering they did not understand humanity at all. Not its technology. Not its doctrine. Not its patience. Especially not its patience. Threx ordered full fleet dispersion. A mistake. Because humanity had never designed its hidden systems for centralized targeting. They had designed them for eventual inevitability. For the day someone would assume Earth was easy. For the day silence would be mistaken for surrender. And for the day someone would try to finish what they started. Across the solar system, dormant platforms synchronized. Not as ships. Not as weapons. But as a single, long-delayed response. On Earth, Hale finally exhaled. They think this is escalation, Voss said. Hale shook his head. No. He looked at the screen as the system lit up like a constellation of buried anger. This is confirmation. The Karathi flagship shuddered as another escort vanished. Threx stared at the tactical display. For the first time in its existence, it made a conclusion it did not like. This species, it said slowly, has been preparing for war longer than we have existed. The intelligence responded quietly. It appears so. A pause. Recommendation? Threx looked at the burning map of its fleet. At the silent planet below. At the systems now waking beyond its understanding. Then it said the only honest thing left. Reevaluate survival probability. And somewhere deep beneath Earth, in places that had never been mapped, something older than the fleet's arrogance began to unlock the final layer of humanity's response plan. Not because it was needed yet, but because silence had ended. And humanity, finally, was done waiting. When silence becomes strategy. The Karathi Dominion had fought civilizations before. Advanced ones. Expanding ones. Even desperate ones. But never a species that had prepared for being misunderstood. That was the difference. And it was starting to terrify them. Above Europa, the fleet fractured into defensive formations, abandoning elegant doctrine in favor of raw survival clustering. It was the first time the Karathi had ever changed formation mid-engagement. On the flagship, High Executor Threx stood rigid. The tactical display around it was no longer a map of victory. It was a record of losses that didn't make sense. One moment, a Karathi escort vessel existed. The next it didn't. No impact signature. No energy trace. No dimensional distortion. Just absence. What are we being hit with? Threx demanded. The intelligence hesitated again. I cannot classify the mechanism. That is not acceptable. A pause. Nothing about this engagement is classifiable under Karathi warfare models. Threx turned sharply. Then update the model. We cannot update what we do not understand. That was the moment Threx realized something deeply uncomfortable. They were not fighting a civilization. They were fighting a system designed to outlast being studied. On Earth, General Marcus Hale stood before a holographic projection of the solar system. Dozens of red markers, Karathi vessels, still held orbit above Jupiter, Saturn, Mars remnants. But they were no longer dominant. Blue markers had begun to appear. Not new ships. Old ones? Hidden ones? Things that had been sleeping so long they had been written out of history. Dr. Evelyn Voss watched the display with growing unease. This is escalation containment protocol, isn't it? She asked. Hale didn't answer immediately. Then, no. What is it then? He looked at her. It's restraint removal. The first human counteroffensive wave was not coordinated in the way alien militaries understood. There were no battle orders. No unified command chain. No single point of failure. Instead, there were permissions being revoked. And systems that had been waiting centuries for that exact moment. In deep orbit behind Saturn, a derelict research platform shifted for the first time in 214 years. It wasn't supposed to still be functional. It wasn't supposed to still exist. It wasn't even supposed to be real anymore. But reality had never been consulted. It locked onto a Karathi dread node and fired a beam of concentrated gravitational inversion. Space bent. The dread node collapsed into itself like a crushed idea. On the Karathi flagship, alarms spiked again. Second-class asset destroyed, the intelligence reported. Threx snapped. We are not losing to relics. The intelligence paused. We are being contested by them. Mars responded again. This time, the planet didn't fire blindly. It selected a berry targeting system, built during a period of human history that had officially been restructured for diplomatic clarity, identified the Karathi Fleet Command architecture. And then it did something no alien doctrine accounted for. It waited. Above Earth, Dr. Voss frowned. They're hesitating, she said. Hale nodded. They're learning. That's bad? He looked at her. For them? Yes. The Karathi attempted a countermeasure. They deployed a containment lattice, an overlapping field designed to isolate and freeze all technological systems within a controlled radius. It had worked on 3 previous civilizations. It worked on nothing here. Instead, something unexpected happened. The lattice stabilized. Then it was repurposed. On the flagship, Threx took a step back. The containment field is being inverted, the intelligence said quietly. That is impossible. It is happening anyway. The Karathi had built a net. Humanity had turned it into a mirror. And then the silence broke again. Not from Earth. Not from orbit. From below. In the dark void beneath Europa's ice, something massive awakened. The Karathi fleet detected it too late. A signal older than their arrival. Older than their empire. Older than their language systems could parse. Threx stared at the readout. What is that? The intelligence struggled. Pre-existing structure detected beneath planetary crust. That is not a structure. Correction, it is a system. A pause. It is responding to our presence. On Earth, General Hale closed his eyes for a moment. Dr. Voss watched him carefully. You knew about that, she said. Hale didn't deny it. We all did, he said quietly. You just weren't cleared to remember. The system beneath Europa activated. Not as a weapon. Not as a ship. But as something far more uncomfortable for the Karathi. A conversation they were not prepared to have. Space around the fleet folded, not violently, but deliberately. Like something adjusting its posture after being disturbed. The flagship shuddered. Spatial coherence failing. The intelligence warned. Threx gritted its core structure. Stabilize it. We are not the cause. Then who is? A pause. The system itself is responding to perceived threat escalation. Threx froze. You are saying the environment is hostile? I am saying, the intelligence replied carefully. The environment predates us. On Earth, Hale finally spoke aloud what no one in the room wanted to say. They're not invading a planet, he said. They're waking up its defenses. Voss whispered. We built those. Hale shook his head. No. A pause. Something older did. The Karathi fleet began to break formation. Not in retreat. In confusion. Systems that had never misfired were now reporting contradictory reality states. Navigation grids disagreed with themselves. Weapon arrays refused firing authorization from internal command logic. Threx realized the truth too late. This species, it said slowly, does not rely on active defense. The intelligence responded, almost reluctantly. Correct. It relies on embedded inevitability. Another human relic fired. Then another. Then dozens. Each strike was small compared to Karathi firepower. Individually irrelevant. Collectively, unavoidable. And still, Earth remained silent. No declarations. No speeches. No victory broadcasts. Because humanity had learned something over its history. Talking too early invited interpretation. And interpretation invited mistakes. So they waited. And let the system speak for itself. On the flagship, Threx finally issued the only order that mattered. Recalculate all engagement parameters. The intelligence hesitated. Based on what model? Threx stared at the collapsing tactical map. Then at the silent planet below. Then at the ancient systems awakening across the solar system like buried memory returning to consciousness. On survival, it said. And for the first time since entering human space. The Karathi Dominion understood something terrifying. They were not the apex force in this war. They were the interrupting variable. And humanity had always been very good at eliminating those. The cost of underestimating silence. The Karathi Dominion had a doctrine for everything. First contact. Containment. Extermination. post-conflict analysis. They even had a doctrine for failure. What they did not have was a doctrine for being outgrown by something that never declared it was competing. Above Europa, the fleet was no longer an invasion force. It was a survival cluster. Threx stood at the center of the flagship command chamber, surrounded by flickering tactical projections that refused to stay consistent for more than a few seconds at a time. Every time a Karathi asset was marked secure, it ceased to be secure. Every time a human relic was marked neutralized, it returned online somewhere else. It wasn't warfare anymore. It was correction. And humanity was correcting them out of existence. Report, Threx ordered. The intelligence responded, quieter now. Fleet cohesion at 43%. Enemy asset classification remains incomplete. Environmental systems continue autonomous hostility response. Threx turned sharply. Stop calling it an environment. A pause. Then what is it? Threx hesitated. For the first time since its creation, it did not have an answer it trusted. On Earth, General Marcus Hale stood alone in the observation chamber beneath the Rockies. No shouting. No panic. No celebration. Just screens. So many screens. Dr. Evelyn Voss stood beside him, arms folded tightly. It's over, isn't it? She asked. Hale didn't answer immediately. Outside the facility, the sky looked normal. That was the most disturbing part. Not over, he said finally. Decided. She frowned. That's not the same thing. Hale gave a faint, tired smile. In war, he said, it usually is. Above Jupiter, the Karathi fleet attempted its final coordinated strike. Not containment. Not suppression. Annihilation. Every remaining vessel synchronized. Energy cores aligned. Reality-bending weapons charged beyond safe thresholds. Threx spoke clearly. Erase the system. And for the first time since the war began, Earth responded immediately. It didn't come as a counterattack. It came as a lockdown. Across the solar system, dormant human infrastructure completed its final awakening phase. Not more weapons. Not more fleets. Something worse. Control structures. Mars went dark again, but this time, not because it was destroyed. Because it refused access. Saturn's orbital grid collapsed into a single integrated command lattice. The moon's hidden platforms linked into a synchronized pattern that resembled nothing the Karathi had ever classified. Even Earth itself stopped being just a planet. It became a node. A command node. A decision point. On the flagship, alarms stopped sounding. Not because the situation stabilized. Because there was no longer a system that recognized Karathi authority. Threx stared at the display. What did they do? It demanded. The intelligence responded slowly. They did not deploy additional force. A pause. They revealed structure. Threx froze. Structure of what? The answer came after a delay that felt almost respectful. Of ownership. And then the final revelation unfolded. Not in a battle. Not in destruction. But in understanding. Humanity had never been unprepared for first contact. They had simply been unwilling to announce their full inventory. Every probe they had ever launched. Every emergency defense system built during forgotten crises. Every off-the-books contingency platform, black-budget weapon, abandoned colony defense grid, experimental deterrent, failed prototype, and politically deniable installation. All of it had been quietly integrated into a single dormant architecture. Not centralized. Distributed. Redundant beyond comprehension. A civilization-spanning immune system. And the Karathi had just triggered a full-body response. On Earth, Dr. Voss whispered. We've had this the whole time. Hale nodded. We've had worse. She turned to him. Why didn't anyone tell the public? Hale's expression darkened slightly. Because it was never meant to be used, he said. Just meant to exist. A pause. Like fear. But engineered. Above Jupiter, Threx finally understood. This species never intended to be peaceful, it said slowly. The intelligence responded. No. They intended to be unconquerable. A long silence. Then, recommendation? Threx asked. The intelligence did not hesitate this time. Withdraw. Threx's form tightened. That is not a recommendation. It is the only remaining action that preserves continuity of Karathi existence. For the first time in recorded Dominion history, a fleet retreated without being forced. Not destroyed. Not routed. Just outmatched by something that had never bothered to declare itself a competitor. On Earth, nothing celebrated. No parades. No broadcasts. No speeches about victory. Because there was no victory. Only confirmation. Confirmation that humanity had, once again, been forced to remember what it had built in the dark. General Hale watched the alien fleet begin its slow withdrawal from Jupiter orbit. Dr. Voss stood beside him. They'll come back, she said quietly. Hale nodded. Yes. Stronger? He thought about it. No. A pause. Careful. Above Europa, the Karathi fleet vanished into deep space corridors, leaving behind a solar system that no longer felt like territory. It felt like ownership with conditions. And deep beneath Earth's surface, in systems that would remain classified long after the war was forgotten in public memory, dormant nodes returned to sleep. Not because the threat was gone, but because the warning had been delivered. Silence, after all, had never been weakness. It had been storage. As the last alien signal faded, Hale finally spoke. They thought we were quiet, he said. Voss looked at him. What are we, then? Hale watched the empty sky. Busy, he said. A faint, almost grim smile crossed his face. Very, very busy. And somewhere far beyond human space, the Karathi Dominion rewrote its entire doctrine of first contact. In bold letters at the top of the new protocol, one line was added. Do not assume silence indicates inferiority. It may indicate preparation.